Hello everyone, welcome to Oeno Gallery. Glad to welcome you all here today. Today is a special day. Aron Hill is with us all the way from Calgary. We've represented Aron Hill for over 8 years, but it is Aron's first time to Oeno Gallery and Prince Edward County, so a big warm welcome to Aron. Aron's contemporary minimalistic approach to the Canadian landscape is bright and bold, but has taken an inspired turn with this series. And it is our pleasure to invite Aron to come up, speak a little bit to the narrative and the process in this new series.
Great, thanks. Thanks so much for having me. Thank you. Thanks. This hopefully will be fast. No, I'm just but also, it's going to be very informal, but I really would love questions. So at any point, please just ask during if you have any specific questions. So I thought I would start quickly, a little bio. I went to school, born in Calgary, went to school in Calgary at ACAD, and then did some further schooling in London, England, and then returned back to Calgary and have been sort of working there ever since. So I thought, I was trying to figure out how to kind of structure this, but I thought I would talk about really what the paintings are to me, or at least this work is to me, and because I think that's, in terms of approaching this work, it was important that I understood them as objects that did something for me. So the work, this specific body of work, came from thinking a lot about care and thinking about the practice of care. And I'll sit down here. So a very specific practice of care that kind of happened starting 2.5 years ago with my youngest daughter, who is in the foster world or foster system, and we all of a sudden got her at 6 hours old, and then have had her since. So, coming to terms with a lot of those issues and the things that kind of come with that, I started thinking about labor and this labor of care and how it works with how I consider my work in relationship to it, and how the work almost acts as therapy for me, if that makes sense. So there's elements to this that are very specific to that story, but then there are elements to this work that speak to just sort of things that coincide with care, like a lot of domestic issues, for example. So that was kind of the approach to the actual physical properties of this work, so the material. So there was a shift to thinking about the paintings more almost as textiles, which involved thinking more about collage and thinking about stitching and thinking about embroidery and things like that. Because one of the issues that I wanted to kind of proactively engage with is the fact that I have 2 older children, but I really wanted the young one to kind of be involved in the actual process of this work, which is a very passive type of involvement, but it's one that made me think about even her touching the work and touching things in the studio, because my studio is actually at home. So a lot of the caregiving was at home while I was making work. So I wanted her to not, or at least me, not to feel like I need to have those things separated. So this issue of separation became kind of a central theme to the practice, where the practice of care kind of coincided with the practice of making artwork. And so the therapy element to that was, and I'm using therapy as a very sort of loose, light therapy, the same way that we go for walks, that kind of therapy. I wanted that separation to disappear, where making work was just a normal part of our life altogether, as this kind of strange family that started to form. So I started to think about traditions of craft traditions and things like that, where you're not having this kind of physical separation from the work. You know, you think about textiles, for example, weaving rugs. It's things you step on or clothes you wear. So that becomes very tactile. It becomes very interactive. So a lot of the work kind of has that reference to it. So that's from a formal standpoint, that's what we're dealing with here. I'll speak a little bit to conceptually where this is coming from too. So most of the work, I'm going to use this piece specifically as kind of the central piece to talk about the sort of the stories and the concepts that most of the work kind of come from. Because although some of them are, fairly abstract, they involve sort of an investigation into very specific elements. So, whether it's, color or whether it's material, there's a variety of sort of different directions that I was investigating. But specifically this piece, so the mule came about, and it could be considered a donkey, but I was very interested in the mule because it became a symbol for me, and it kind of a profound sort of story behind it in terms of my life, is that the mule is an animal that normally cannot have its own offspring. So it's a sterile animal. And yet it's an animal that often is used to care for other things. So it's used to carry things, it's a heavy working animal. So that became an interesting sort of symbolic thing about caring for a child that is not your offspring and caring for a child that brings with it a lot of other sort of historical and social challenges. Because the other part of the story is that my daughter's mom lives on and off the street, but is very involved in our life and is very much a part of our life. And she struggles with a lot of addictions and things like that. And one of the things that, getting involved in this relationship, this issue of a mule having a pack and carrying things became very important to us, partly because, when we see her on the street, meet her, she's often a consistent sort of theme is carrying bags and lots of things, and those things often are changing. It's one day she'll be carrying a cart, and the next day it's something different. So it's been kind of an interesting thing to sort of talk to our own children about that, and then how you sort of deal with explaining that to a young one who's growing up and has a relationship. So it's been fantastic. It's been an absolute. We're very fortunate to have this experience, and she's a great person. So that's so the other element to the mule, that the story that I was very interested in was, I was just saying to some people here, is, and this again being out from out west, the figure of David Thompson is, there's a number of roads named after David Thompson. There's whole areas named after David Thompson. David Thompson, if you don't know, did a lot of mapping of the area around the Rocky Mountains. And one of the I've read his journals, and a story that has always stuck in my mind, this is years ago, reading this, he was hired by a number of traders who asked him to take on his pack animals alcohol to trade to some of the indigenous communities across the mountains. And he recognized this as just not a good thing, and he ended up wrote it in a letter back explaining what happened. He sent his pack animals through these rocky kind of areas purposely to destroy the alcohol. and he wrote back to them and saying, anytime you're asking me to trade alcohol, this will happen again. So he kind of took this stance, and that story always kind of stood out in my mind. I'm not saying, I'm not defending David Thompson at all, but this, he had his issues as well. But that story did stick out in my mind. So our little one is from a nation 12 hours north of Calgary, and she's Dene Ta. So these last 2.5 years have been about connecting with that community via her mom, and kind of navigating those tricky sort of political issues too. So that's been part of it. So the other part of this piece you'll see, and this comes up in another piece, the black part here, you'll see the picture of a swaddled baby, and it comes up here as well. So that's part of this, the idea of textiles too, is making patterns and things like that. So I started to think more about patterns. So this picture of this baby came about, and we were just discussing this earlier with someone, because someone said, is that an Indigenous child? And I'm very careful to talk about it in this way because, I want to be very sensitive in terms of appropriation. But what was curious is this drawing came about, I drew this of our children years ago, because that's how we'd swaddle our children. And anyone who's probably dealt with a very small child, we probably all swaddled them. And so this has been a very interesting discussion that has come up about cultural appropriation. And I said, well, actually that was just how we dealt with our children, right? And then which made me start to think about more sort of universal themes about how we care. And so that has been kind of on the forefront of my mind as well. The last thing I'm gonna talk about too are the rocks that kind of come up in this work. I'll maybe talk about two more things. The rocks have always, for a number of years, come up in my work, and they operate as two sort of symbolic things. One being they are, growing up, especially in the prairie landscape, and then also in the mountains. Rocks are often used as place markers. If you ever hike, you'll see these as directional sort of, pathfinding sort of things. But the other part of it too is that they've always been a stand-in for the remnants or something like that of an altar. So altars to me were kind of a fascinating theme. I grew up in a. You're getting all my sort of personal stories here, so sorry about this. I grew up in a fairly evangelical, conservative church. My parents were not, thankfully, and we sort of progressed out of that. But I remember those stories. I remember those stories of these Old Testament stories of sacrifices and things like that. So that was like part of my ingrained kind of cultural sort of exposure. And I find it, I'm always fascinated by those stories of sacrifice and altars. So that's where the rocks often come up too. Lastly, the theme of the sun or the round thing comes from it being obviously a sun or a moon, but those very key moments at night or dawn or dusk where they're kind of moments this is all throughout literature and mythology, where those are the kind of the magic times, and they could be really hard times or transitional times, but that's kind of the theme here. And kind of this, even the idea of a dawn or this new sun coming up every day. It's like this. At least we can approach this as a new day type of thing. So there's something very hopeful. But also at night, it's the eclipsed moon over there or the eclipsed sun also has those kind of magical moments to it. And lastly, and I was going to say the archway piece. So arches also have come up a lot as places that are these doorways to something else. So that's often in my mind as well. I think I think I might just leave it there for a bit, and I'll take, yeah, great.
I have a question.
Yes, good.
And this is good leeway. So you mentioned how you were referencing or going towards textile.
Yeah.
Did you do some research about, I guess, quilts and the sort of
Mm-hmm.
traditions that are now coming out of like modern quilting and this sort of thing?
Yeah, yeah.
And then also, your textile sort of manipulation, was that mostly, like in this painting, mostly painting? Or you went into, spraying with Javex or working with
Yeah.
non-stretch canvas and
Yeah.
sort of thing?
Yeah, so yeah, those are great questions and comments. What I really was very interested in this work was making the canvas and any material I used, thinking about them more as objects and less as paintings. So what you pointed out, that color there, it is bleached, and I often use bleach. So I started to become very interested in how, when you almost, as opposed to layering something on, like putting paint on a canvas, I was kind of curious about taking it away. So that to me, it was a very physical process, one that is more similar to dealing with, say, sculpture or something like that. It's a physical thing as opposed to creating, like, subject matter, right? They become very, very physical in my mind. So yeah, and then quilt making, definitely. There's a lot of consideration about that. And I mean, this is, when you look at trends in contemporary art right now, there's a huge attention to more traditional crafts and those kind of hand tactile type of processes. So absolutely, yeah.
Can you speak to the pink color that seems to be kind of
Yeah.
different in quality than the rest of the colors? But
Yeah.
it's a common
Yeah.
theme?
Yeah. I think the pink, partly it is such a beautiful color, but I wanted a color that's kind of shocking in the same way that you'd encounter on dirt a flower, right? So it's that kind of contrasting thing. But I was very influenced by, a number of years ago, reading, it was actually during COVID, I feel like I read it multiple times, was the Odyssey. And if you've ever read the Odyssey, the reference to the morning fingers of dawn, and it's in various translations it calls it something else, but this attention from the narrator about, and Odysseus is struggling and having this horrible time, but this new day approach is always sort of there, and they always refer to it as the rosy dawn or something. So that always stuck in my mind, and I think it really was simply kind of I think, hope or something new that was always there and anyone who's dealt with giving care to anyone, nights are difficult. They can be very difficult. No matter who, it's an adult giving care to an elderly, nights can be quite difficult. So there is the sun that comes up and it's like, oh, okay, made it type of thing. Right, so, yeah.
I'm wondering about, I see, and I might be not using the right language, but doesn't matter. I see feminine references
Yes.
a lot in your work.
Yes.
Whether it's the shapes of those prints there.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how I read it.
Yeah. Yeah.
The stitching.
Yeah.
And the handling of the fabric.
Yeah.
Also.
Yes.
The colors. Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
what would you like to say about that?
No, it's very true. So I think one of the most influential sort of areas that I sort of went down that was so helpful to me in this whole process with the foster world and child welfare and this whole thing is starting to read more by queer writers specifically, and understanding more of the tradition of the feminist tradition of having to deal with making work, dealing with domestic things that were the division of labor, all these sort of things that as a was a bit foreign to me. So I really had to, but as a result of that, that was extremely helpful to me to get my head around, and not head around like I figured it out, but that helped me through those kind of very care-based situations. And also in thinking traditionally and historically, the work that I'm mostly drawn to in terms of specifically craft does come from a more direct connection to care. So whether it be actually making clothing, you would make clothing for your family, or you would make a rug for your home. So this was about care. And so that made me think a lot about what comes out of care. So these, all this work almost was like a physical manifestation of care. And the primary and the foundational thing was the practice of care. And then these things became almost like a part of a positive feedback loop for me to sort of keep me going. The same way that we would do anything that keeps you going, whether it's going for a walk every morning. These became that kind of thing for me. So to me, when they were successful, they were the pieces that when I would see them, they almost were inspiring for me to keep going. If that kind of, that makes it sound a little bit melodramatic, but kind of along those lines. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
What about the transparency? What did you want it to do with the layering?
Yeah, so the transparency, that's been a major theme all throughout my work. And just that process, because I really like, from a visual standpoint, how, it's almost like magic when you start layering these colors over top of each other, very translucent colors. And how those, as you layer them, actually we were having this great discussion with someone about layering and about how richness comes through this kind of layering of history, layering of cultures, whatever you want to call it. To me, it just gets more and more interesting, right? So it definitely directly connects to my interest in collage too, right? So there's that it's almost like collaging shapes together. So as opposed to just something on top of each other, I wanted, to me, it feels almost a bit I keep using the word magical, but there's something kind of hard to explain, even though it's very easy to explain from a visual standpoint or from a technical standpoint. There's still something kind of makes me feel kind of fascinated, like about that, right? Like this light that comes. It's about light too, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other questions?
What I find about this one is that all the elements that are, the pictorial elements are, aside from the leaves, are actually heavy, but they're treated very lightly.
Yeah.
So that, again, does something in my brain.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Are there other painters who have inspired your work? Reminds me a lot of the American colorists, and Art Hill in particular.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious if there were
Mm-hmm.
painters that you really loved and inspired you.
I think there's often been a connection to even the Painters 11, some of the Canadian abstract painters. It's funny though about abstraction though, I and minimalism, we had this little bit of a discussion about this. I'm fascinated by how when those kind of things blur those lines between abstraction and representation, and then also how things become symbolic too. So I'm trying to think, well, even someone like Georgia O'Keeffe, her application of colors I'm totally blown away by, right? So from a formal standpoint, yes, but how that work also becomes highly symbolic too. And so when I do approach a lot of these works, they are how am I gonna say, they almost become like, they are kind of objects. The colors become objects too, right? So as opposed to on a field, like they're not, these paintings are almost like stages, if that makes sense. So I'm fascinated by that, how colors can do that, and they kind of sit as objects. Yeah, I didn't really answer that great, but somewhere there's something there. Maybe. Oh yeah.
I just want to congratulate you on being a foster parent.
Thank you.
I think that's amazing. Not a lot of people will take on that responsibility, and these little people need people like you.
Yeah, thank you.
Especially taking an Indigenous child into your home. I worked in the Indigenous community for a number of years, and it's a very different culture from what you and I grew up with, and it's a steep learning curve.
It is, yeah.
It is, and so good for you for doing that.
Oh, thanks.
I'm also have a technical question. I work with fabric, and I sometimes attach fabric to canvases as well. And I just wondered, I'm presuming you did your hand stitching on your fabrics before you applied them to the canvas?
No, so the way I do it is, so all these pieces are actually made unstretched. So what I'll do is, for example, that piece, I lay it flat, canvas flat, stretch it on a piece on a table.
Right.
Do the painting, unstretch it, and then I'll sew or embroider when it's unstretched.
Right.
But I glue first. So the material's glued first, just to keep it together, like these pieces.
What
So
kind of glue do you use?
I use hot glue. Hot glue, and there's specific fabric hot glue for this, which is extremely strong. However, I wouldn't depend on it. That's why, and then I sew it. And so yeah, so and then when I stretch it, because it can get a little bit weird, but when I stretch it, all those weird bits come out, and it actually works out very nicely. Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, it is a tricky one because it's like that classic proverb of putting old wine into new wineskins, you know that saying? Because you're getting different levels of stretch, right? So I've got to be careful of that. You can really get some strange things.
Especially if you're using different fabrics.
Exactly.
Canvas and you're using
Yeah,
fabric
that's right.
together, right?
Yeah. And some have been oiled, some have been primed, so there's, yeah. But it actually seems to, once I stretch, it's fine. It's just that process. Now, I want to comment real quickly on your first comment about, because I want to be very careful not to exploit any of this kind of situation. And I also want to say that, like, I can't even explain the gift that was given to us in terms of learning and dealing with that community. So it's been fantastic, but it's a tricky one to navigate.
It's challenging, but it broadens your horizons.
Absolutely, yeah. And the community has been, her community has been so good to us,
Right.
and developing that relationship with her nation has been fantastic, and just it's quite an amazing. Very, very fortunate, yeah. And it's so good for our older kids too, to have that relationship, yeah. Yeah.
Wondering, like, how much of your work is sort of like premeditated, and how much you kind of improvise, like, or it's like immediate stuff, or just.
Yeah.
If you make a mistake, maybe you have to roll with that and scrap it, or.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. So yeah, there is no the ink, the painting part of it. It's not forgiving at all. So I can never cover anything up. So I do plan it out quite a bit. So I'll do drawings of, approximate sort of where I'm going to put things. Just kind of planning. And then so there's that. But however, with this works, with the more collaging, I can be a little bit more playful with it because I can, put a piece down. Does that look good together before I actually sew it? Or, so that's actually been it's been a little bit more playful, this newer work, because there's a little bit more room for forgiveness in terms of, actually committing to something. Whereas this, like doing that mule, yeah, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, then you have to scrap it. So, but in saying that, as a result, I end up with a lot of scraps, which is now I'm using more in the work. And then I'll sometimes take that canvas and dye it or do something different with it. Yeah. Yeah.
So I see that your paper drawings are quite a little different from what you're doing with the collage.
Yeah. Now the paperwork, I love works on paper. To me, I love paper. Partly because it's such a material. Like it's in a weird way, it's more material for me than painting on canvas. So in a strange way, the works on paper are actually more similar to the process of collaging these paintings or sewing, because they, I don't know. I think it's just there's something similar to it, but they are different. But there is a similar sort of approach. They're very much a similar approach. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions or criticisms?
I'm puzzled by the two shapes on the right side of this, in the middle of this painting.
Yeah.
Everything feels relatively friendly. I do see the bottom band,
Yeah.
a little bit like, I don't know, well, it's definitely darkness. And, I see broken bottles.
Yeah, and they are broken bottles.
And they
Yeah.
feel, so they feel harmful.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
quite, so you have, just.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Yeah, no, that's definitely it. They are broken bottles, and I've always liked drawing broken bottles. I think partly it's the reference to addiction and things like that. That's definitely it, and that story of I don't know if they're glass bottles that were broken, but that's kind of spending time on the street, you see a lot of broken bottles, so that's always been kind of a connection, and having it near a rock. That's that other connection of those two, kind of a natural object that sometimes is just there, but with a smashed rock beside it means something different, right? So I kind of like that theme, yes. But yeah, they are not nice objects, but yeah. But they're also cartoonish too. That's a fake broken bottle, definitely. Any other? I'll make one. The last thing I'll make is the embroidery, and this piece specifically. What's been really nice is and people who do any other sort of kind of crafts that require kind of repetitive movements or whatever. It's been so nice in terms of, again, thinking about therapy, but that sort of physical engagement has been part of my work now, and so these like even these lines, kind of this idea of counting and things like that. So that's the connection with the embroidery too. Is this repetitive stitching? Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Aron.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks. And I want to thank the gallery for such generosity, and also this area is absolutely beautiful, as you all know because you live here. But it's an amazing landscape and a really friendly place. So it's been a great treat here. Thank you.
Happy to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks.
grateful to represent you and hope to show you around a little
Good.
more. Yeah.
Good. Thanks, everyone.